So, as Heineken Rivalry Week rolls on, we got 11 games that is going to be happening this week. And as I said in the midweek preview, just because this week is Heineken Rivalry Week doesn't mean that every single game is actually a rivalry, and that in some games it's kind of just a normal MLS kind of game, and that there's really no rivalry in terms of that match. But since, as I said, during the middle of the week where I want to at least come up with a name of every single game to be kind of a rivalry and a derby name, I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the weekend's game, and that even in some games that it's not really a rivalry, I'm going to try to find a way to come up with a name of this, just so we can, of course, stick with the theme of Heineken Rivalry Week from this weekend. Now, I'm going to also try to do this video as quick as possible because in about 40 minutes from now, Minnesota versus Sporting KC is going to be kicking off. So I want to get this done as quick as possible so that I don't miss a lot of action of that game. And we start off with the first game of Heineken Rivalry Weekend with the Southeastern Derby, also known as the one-sided derby between Orlando City versus Atlanta. And the reason why I call this the one-sided derby is because the only team that has been able to win this derby has been Atlanta United, and that there is still a lot of dispute and argument of whether or not if this is actually a rivalry, considering the fact that it's been just so one-sided. Now, coming into this game, Orlando City drew 1-1 against Minnesota away. They could have won that game if they would have held on for the last couple of minutes and didn't concede in stoppage time. While Atlanta United, of course, won 2-0 against Portland away. It was a big statement win for them, and a win that you could definitely say that they are definitely back being one of the best and probably the kings of the Eastern Conference right now. Now, in the last 5 head-to-head match between both of these teams, which exclude the U.S. Open Cup that just happened a couple of weeks ago, as I said, it's been pretty much all Atlanta United in terms of this derby. They, of course, won 1-0 against Orlando City in the last match, then won 2-1 against Orlando City, then won 4-0 against Orlando City, winning 2-1 again away to Orlando City, and they actually drew to Orlando City 3-3, and that there's actually only been 2 draws that has happened in this rivalry, and that surprisingly both of those draws that Orlando City was able to salvage and weren't able to and that Atlanta weren't able to beat Orlando City was actually at home. But so far, every match when Atlanta versus Orlando City meets at Orlando City, it's been Atlanta that has been able to win this game. And, you know, I guess you could say Atlanta is going to be once again favored in this match, considered they definitely are feeling the momentum after that last win against Portland, and that they look really like the Atlanta United from last season that they're starting to show. But Orlando City is a team that is fighting for playoff position, and that this is probably the first time since their first year in MLS where they are actually still in MLS contention this deep into the season. I mean, the last couple of years, they tried to get into that playoff conversation, but they basically decided to fold and collapse in the second half of the season. So, you know, if there is a time for Orlando City to get their first ever win against their hated rival Atlanta United, this will definitely be the game to do it. And that if they do win against Atlanta for the first time this season, yeah, that's going to carry a lot of momentum for them. And that you could say that they definitely believe that they could actually make the playoffs for the first time in their MLS franchise history. But then again, Atlanta has really started to show the Atlanta United team from last season, and that I won't be surprised if this is going to be like what has happened with this derby, which is Atlanta end up winning this game. Now, moving on into the next derby is probably the most historic and the biggest derby of this weekend, which is the Cascadia Derby between Portland versus Seattle. Now, Portland, of course, is coming into this match with a record of 11-4-10 and currently 7 in the Western Conference, while Seattle currently have a record of 11-7-8. Portland, of course, lost 2-0 to Atlanta at home. I don't know why I said away. They actually were playing at home in that match, but Seattle, of course, drew 2-2 against the Galaxy away, and they were very lucky to draw 2-2 in that game. Have it wasn't for the Bingham Howler late in the game, they would have actually lost that one, and it would have been an embarrassing loss to the Galaxy, considering the fact that they had 84 minutes of that game with a man up. Now, in the last 5 head-to-head matches in this Cascadia Derby, it's been pretty even. Portland, of course, won the last one earlier this season by beating Seattle 2-1. But Seattle, of course, beat Portland last year in this Cascadia Derby, and Portland won nothing. Then Portland, of course, won 3-2 against Seattle, before Portland winning again against the Sounders 1-0, before drawing 1-1 against the Sounders. And by the way, all these last 5 head-to-head matches is excluding US Open Cup and playoff, and it's pretty much the case for every single game that I'm going to be talking about in terms of the last 5 head-to-head matches in these kind of games. But, this is definitely, as much as we talk about how this is the biggest derby in MLS, and this is probably the best derby by far of all MLS, because it has the hatred, it has the history, and it definitely sometimes provides some crazy kind of circumstances in these games. This is also a game that can really springboard a team into a very good run for the latter part of the season. And I just think when you look at who needs to win this game so that they can finally get things going and that they can have a good run at the end of the season, it has to be the Seattle Sounders, because the Sounders, they have just fallen apart in these last couple of weeks, and that, they've been saying that this is probably the second crisis that the Seattle Sounders have ever dealt in their MLS history, and it is kind of the case. I mean, they are just falling apart, and that they are literally dropping down to the 5th spot in the Western Conference, and it's just getting to a point where they are actually, I think, only 2 points above the red line, and that they could actually potentially miss the playoffs for the first time in their franchise history. And that if they, of course, can able to beat the Timbers on the road, which is not going to be easy because the Timbers rarely lose back-to-back road games at Providence Park, but if they can, of course, win against their hated rival, then this could really start to springboard their season and really kind of show the Seattle Sounders earlier this season. I mean, this season for the Sounders, it's been kind of the complete opposite as we have seen in previous season, where it seemed like the Sounders always start badly in the beginning of the season, but then they have a crazy second half resurgence to, of course, get themselves into the playoffs. This season, it's been the opposite. It's been they have a great start in the first half of the season, but now they are started to collapse in the second half of the season. And I'm pretty sure if I had to pick, should I be supporting a team that has a bad start to the first half of the season but picks it up in the second half, to a team that had a great start in the first half of the season compared to or great start to the first half season but have a bad run in the second half of the season, I would definitely pick the team that have a bad start in the first half of the season and pick it up in the second half of the season, because even if the Sounders does make the playoffs, this bad run that they are carrying into the playoffs will not really give them a lot of chances of actually winning a single elimination game. And that we've seen so many times that teams make a deep run into the playoffs in MLS has been teams that are just getting hot at the right point of the season, which is near the end of the season, and that they carry that momentum into the playoffs. So hopefully, if the Sounders win this game against the Timbers, that can really kickstart a good run that they can have in September that can carry them into the playoffs. Otherwise, if they lose this against the Timbers, then yeah, there's definitely gonna be even more panic that is going on in the Sounder fan base. Now, moving on into the next match is the New York Derby. So the New York Derby between NYCFC versus the Redbulls sees NYCFC currently with a record of 12-8-5, and they're actually 1 point from going to the top of the Eastern Conference, and they have a game in hand over that team that is currently out at the top of the Eastern Conference, that is Atlanta United, while they, of course, are playing against the Redbulls, who currently have a record of 12-5-10. NYCFC, of course, won 1-0 against Columbus at home, but as I'm going to be as I'm going to kind of explain their game between them and Columbus later in the review, it was not a very pretty result for NYCFC. And the Redbulls, of course, won 2-1 against DC United away, but that was a very controversial game, which I also talk about the Atlantic Cup and how it probably was one of the most controversial game of the season. Now, in the last 5 head-to-head matchup, historically, the Red Bulls have been better in terms of this rivalry, but NYCFC has started to quietly catch up in terms of actually being competitive in this Hudson River Derby. The Red Bulls, of course, won 2-1 against NYCFC in the last match, but that, of course, was the match where, the second goal that the Red Bulls scored was kind of a confusion between whether or not if it was a header or actually a corner, and that NYCFC was very confused about that, and that we had that whole controversial moment. Then NYCFC drew 1-1 against the Red Bulls before winning their first ever Hudson Derby against the Red Bulls 1-0. But the Red Bulls did win 4-0 against NYCFC before both teams, of course, drawing again 1-1. Now, when I look at this match, I want to say, I can't really tell who is really going to be favorites coming into this match. I mean, I guess if I had to give a favorites and who could potentially win this game, I would give the edge a little bit toward NYCFC because they're playing at home. But we have seen before in this derby where the Red Bulls are able to win on the road against NYCFC. And heck, the most famous game out of this derby has been that red wedding a couple of years ago where the Red Bulls was able to beat NYCFC 7-0 at Yankee Stadium. So I don't know. It's hard to tell who exactly is the favorites in this game. I think both of these teams are kind of very evenly matched, and that I think at the end of the day, whoever wants to win this game is going to be the one that really wants it the most, and that if either of these teams can win this derby, it can definitely propel themselves in the standing. And that, in some way, it's kind of similar to the beginning of the season where, both of these teams are kind of right around the same spot and right around like the middle of the table. Although NYCFC have recently got themselves into the top 3 and the Red Bulls are currently in 5th. But if the Red Bulls can win that match, I believe they would leapfrog NYCFC. And actually, just to make sure, I'm going to actually look at the standing right now, and I believe the Red Bulls is actually 2 points behind NYCFC right now, and NYCFC obviously have 2 games in hand over the team that is just above them, which is the Union, and 1 game ahead, or 1 game. They have 1 game in hand over Atlanta. And let's see, is that the case? And actually, the Red Bulls is actually in 4th place. And actually, it's a 3-point gap between both of these teams. But NYCFC does have 2 games in hand over the Red Bulls. So, in some way, if both of these teams want to get into the top part of the table, I think the Red Bulls might want to get a victory in this game, considering the fact that even if NYCFC lose this game, they still have those game in hand over the Red Bulls to get above the table. But we shall see. This is definitely a very evenly matched and one that is kind of hard to predict who is going to win this game. But moving on into the next match. Now, this is the first of a couple of games that is not really kind of like a rivalry game, and that there isn't really a name of this derby because both of these teams are not in a close proximity to each other. And that, of course, is the New England Revolution taking on the Chicago Fire, which the Revs currently have a record of 9-8-9, and Chicago currently have a record of 8-9-11. But if I have to name a rivalry and a derby name in this game, I would say this is the battle for those playoff position derby. Because New England, while they are in the playoffs right now and currently in 6th in the standing, I believe they are actually not that far of dropping out. In fact, they're actually only 1 point above the red line right now, although they do have a game in hand over Montreal and Orlando City that is actually trying to catch them for those spots. And that New England, they also potentially could have a chance to get even higher in the table, considering the fact that DC is started to kind of collapse a little bit, which I'll of course explain later when I talk about the Union versus DC. While Chicago, they are only 1 point below the red line, but the problem with the Chicago Fire is that they have played 28 games so far this season, and that, alongside with DC United, is the most game that any team have played so far in the Eastern Conference, and that, you just kind of have a feeling that, if Chicago, if they want to really have a chance to go above the red line, they really need to win some of these games, considering the fact that teams above them actually have game in hand over them. Now, New England, of course, in the last match drew 1-1 against the Red Bulls away, while Chicago won 2-0 against Philly at home. And in the last 5 head-to-head match between both of these teams, and how I talked about how Chicago really needs to win this game, well, history is definitely on their side in terms of this match, because Chicago has really been the dominant team in this matchup, with them winning 5-0 against New England earlier this season. But obviously that was a match where, Brad Friedel was still in charge of New England, and I believe that was actually the last match that Brad Friedel was in charge, because New England fired him after this game. And then, of course, they drew 2-2 in this game last year before drawing 1-1 again in Chicago. But Chicago, of course, won 4-1 against New England, and they did win 2-1 against New England on the road. But one thing I will say that is going to be a disadvantage for the Fire coming into this game is that they do not have a good road record, and that I believe they only have won 1 game so far this season on the road, which is definitely not a lot. And considering the fact that New England has been very good so far this season at home, and this is a New England team that have only lost once in, I believe, 14 or 15 matches, and that only loss they suffer was against LAFC, against the best team in the league. So yeah, this is definitely not a New England team that we've seen in the past, where it's kind of a very mediocre team, and Chicago was able to get 3 points or even get a point against a mediocre team. But there's no doubt that Chicago really wants to win this game, considering the fact that they want to keep their hopes of making the playoffs, and that New England wants to win this game too, because they want to get higher in the table and maybe even have a shot in terms of hosting a playoff game. I mean, it's still a bit of a stretch in terms of them trying to host a playoff game, because the closest team that is currently occupied that last home playoff spot, which is the Red Bulls, currently have a 5-point gap on them. And the only thing I will say is that New England does have a game in hand over the Red Bulls in terms of that, but it's still a bit of a stretch whether or not if New England can, of course, get into the top 4. But yeah, moving on is the Desperation Derby. So throughout the season, I've been naming some of these games the Desperation Derby, because this is the game where both teams are desperate to try to get a win. And this week, the Desperation Derby heads to Philadelphia as the Union take on DC United in a game where both teams are desperate to try to get a win. The Union is 13-6-8, and they fell out of first place for the first time in a couple of months, and that they're facing against a DC team that is really heading into a tailspin, and now dropped their record to 10-9-9. Philly, of course, lost 2-0 to Chicago away, while DC lost 2-1 to the Red Bulls at home. And in the last 5 head-to-head matches, excluding the U.S. Open Cup, yeah, just like what I said in the last match, where Chicago has pretty much dominated the head-to-head matches in the last 5 matches, well, Philly pretty much have dominated the last 5 head-to-head match, and that they actually have won the last 5 head-to-head match in this series. Now, the last game that both of these teams face each other was actually a couple of weeks ago, and that was that 5-1 beatdown that they hand DC United in that game. And that was the game where DC United fans were not only questioned with the fact that, they are suffering a tailspin, but they were questioned whether or not if Ben Olsen should deserve a job after such a calamity of a loss at home. Then, of course, they lost 2-0 to Philly again at home. Philly, of course, then beat DC again 3-2, and then they won 1-0 against DC before once again destroying DC United 4-0 on the road. And that it seemed like whenever Philly and DC face each other, DC definitely do not want to face Philly at home, because if they do that, Philly has shown in the last 5 matches and shown in the recent history that they have absolutely destroyed them whenever Philly is on the road. But the good news for DC United is that they're not going to be at home in this game, and that they are going to be on the road against the Union, and that the Union this season, they haven't been as good at home as you would think that a team in the top part of the table would be. So that might be a little bit good news for DC. However, I just think with DC of how things have gone sour in these last couple of months, and also the fact that they will know that they're not going to have Wayne Rooney for this game. This could definitely be a big issue for DC, and that, I just think that if they do not win this match, I believe they would, they actually would still stay in 5th spot because they have a 4-point gap over New England, and that they're currently 5 points above the playoff line. But still, with the way that they have gone and that they have picked up so few points in not just the last couple weeks, but ever since probably the beginning of May, I'm really concerned about DC chances of not only getting maybe a top spot in the Eastern Conference or maybe getting a home game, but actually missing the playoffs as a whole. I mean, as I mentioned also before, they have played alongside with Chicago the most game out of anybody in the Eastern Conference, and that couple of teams have a couple of games in hand over them. So yeah, if the DC does lose this game and the team below them were able to win those matches, then they could really be in deep trouble, and that they could really be looking at a Montreal situation where they could fall out in terms of the playoff race. But moving on into the last game on this board is the Great Canadian Derby between TFC versus Montreal. And as I mentioned before, Montreal alongside with DC, who has really been spending most of the time near the top part of the table. Well, their bad run for the last couple of months have really caught up to them, and that they have found themselves near just above the red line right now, and that in Montreal cases, they're literally just above the red line, and that they are hanging by a thread in this game with them tied with Orlando City and TFC in terms of that spot. And that, when you look at the records, TFC currently have a 9-7-10 record, and Montreal currently have a 10-4-13 record. Toronto, of course, drew 2-2 against Columbus away, while Montreal had an epic collapse against Dallas, where they not only drew 3-3 in this game against Dallas, but they were up 3-0 at home, and they blew it that 3-goal lead in a span of 30 minutes. Now, in the last 5 head-to-head matches, TFC, of course, won the last head-to-head matches by winning 2-0 against Montreal, and this was actually not far ago, and I believe it happened last month. Montreal, of course, did win 2-0 against TFC after that, but TFC, of course, win 3-1 against Montreal before Montreal once again winning against TFC 1-0, and then TFC, of course, win 1-0 against Montreal. So it's kind of, it's kind of even in terms of the last 5 head-to-head matches, and it seemed like one team, of course, wins this derby, but then the very next game, the other team, of course, win. And if this pattern stays, then you would say that Montreal should be able to win this Great Canadian Derby against TFC. And I just think that, they just got to win this derby against TFC because, as I mentioned, TFC is one of the 3 teams that is currently tied for that last spot in the playoff race, and that Montreal does have a game in hand over TFC in terms of, or TFC actually have a game in hand over Montreal in terms of that spot. So if TFC, of course, win this match and Montreal loses, then TFC would get back above the red line, and depending on what Orlando City does, and if they, of course, lose, then they would once again find themselves in sole position of that playoff spot or the last playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. So there's really a lot is riding on the lines, and that this could really, I just kind of have a feeling that when you look at both of these Canadian teams, I have a feeling at the end of the season, one of them will make it to the playoffs and one of them might miss the playoffs, considering the fact that, when you look at how tight the table is, that might be the case. And that when I look at who exactly out of these two teams might actually miss the playoffs, I think Montreal could be that team, consider how things have gone, and that they have really gone through kind of a depth spiral in the last couple of months. And I'm not saying TFC is not one of those teams. TFC hasn't been good in the last couple of months either and haven't picked up a lot of points. But when you look at Montreal and their situation for the last couple of months, and the fact that they have, of course, just recently fired Remy Gard just a couple of days ago, things are definitely not looking very good for this team. Although, as I said, with them of course, firing Remy Gard. They also have just recently hired Wilmer Cabrera as their head coach, and we know that Wilmer Cabrera is a coach that knows how to guide a kind of mediocre team to the playoffs, and that he of course did it with Houston a couple of years ago. And we've seen before, as I mentioned time and time again, whenever there's a new coach coming in, more time or not, the players are going to play harder in that game because they want to impress their new head coach in that instant. And that in this instant, when Wilmer Cabrera is definitely named the permanent head coach of Montreal, you expect a lot of impact player is going to definitely have to play hard so that they can leave a good first impression in terms of their new head coaches. But that being said, I am now going to switch the board right now and look at the last 5 games that's going to be happening this week in Heineken Rivalry Week. But yeah, next up is the Rocky Mountain Cup between RSL versus the Rapids. So RSL is coming into this game with a 12-4-10 record, while the Rapids are coming into this game with a 7-6-13 record. RSL, of course, unfortunately had their unbeaten run at home comes to an end against the best team in the league as they lost 2-0, and it's not away. Make the same mistake as I did earlier in this video. It's actually whatever. Just pretend they're actually lost 2-0 at home, and unfortunately their unbeaten run does come to an end at home. While Colorado, of course, drew 2-2 against Houston away, and that in the last 5 matches between both of these teams, RSL have definitely been the team that has kind of owned Colorado in the Rocky Mountain Cup. They, of course, won 3-2 earlier this season against the Rapids. Then they won 6-0 against the Rapids, and that was the game where the Rapids actually finished with just 9 men. And, you know, while the Rocky Mountain Cup is a rivalry that not a lot of people kind of take it very serious, and that a lot of people don't think this is actually a very fiery rivalry. Well, you might be surprised the fact that there actually has been a lot of red cards that has happened in this rivalry, and I believe in the last 5 matches we have seen 5 or 6 red cards that has happened in these last 5 matches. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of intensity, and there's definitely kind of in some way a little bit of hatred in terms of this game, even though a lot of people don't really associate with. Now, RSL and Colorado drew 2-2 the last time this game was at Real Salt Lake. Then, of course, they won 3-0 against Colorado before Colorado did win against 1-0 against RSL. And that, of course, is the lone win that they had in the last 5 head-to-head matchup. Now, RSL, if you look at this game, they are definitely the favorites against the Rapids, who is near the bottom of the Western Conference, and that it looked like their season is pretty much done. But the Rapids is one of those teams that, even though their season is going to be done and that they probably won't make the playoffs this season, this is probably the biggest spoiler team in the Western Conference, or even in the league right now. Like, this team, they know that they probably won't make the playoffs this season, but they are also going to make sure that the team that they're facing against are not going to also make the playoffs, and that they are just a huge spoiler kind of team. And I will not be surprised if Colorado is going to get a draw out of this game, or even get a win against RSL, because, you know, the Rapids, I really think that if it wasn't for that winless run that they had in the beginning of the season where they got 11 games without a win, I think this team would have been in the playoff race, and that, you know, they actually have not looked very bad in these last couple of months, and that they have also been a very tough team to play against. So, yeah, I will not be surprised if the Rapids can spoil RSL chances of getting even higher into the table in the Western Conference. And it will also be very interesting to see how RSL responds after losing to LAFC, and that was really the first loss they have suffered in a while at home. Now, moving on into the next match is the Third Wheel Derby. And for those of you that don't know why this is called Third Wheel Derby, is because both of these teams are kind of playing third fiddle in their region, and that they are kind of considered the less important team in their region. For the Quakes, of course, they obviously are always in the shadow of the Galaxy and LAFC. And for Vancouver, they're always in the shadow in terms of the Cascadia region of Portland and Seattle. Now, the Quakes are coming into this game with an 11-5-10 record, while Vancouver is dead last in the Western Conference with a 6-9-12 record. However, the Quakes are winless in 4 games, and I don't need to tell you how important this game is against Vancouver, and how I think it's getting to a point of the season where we are really heading into must-win territory of how things have gone with the Quakes, and that their playoff chances is really on the line. Now, Vancouver did win in their last match against DC United at home 1-0. And in terms of the last 5 head-to-head matches, the Quakes, of course, won against Vancouver about a couple of weeks ago, 3-1 on the road. But Vancouver did win 2-1 against the Quakes. And then the Whitecaps did win against the Quakes and won one of the rarest matches against the Quakes at Avaya Stadium by winning 3-2 against them. Then, of course, they drew 2-2 in the earlier matchup last season before drawing 1-1 in the 27 meeting, and that this was go down as one of the most important resort of the Quakes making the playoffs in 2017. But like I mentioned, the Quakes does have a very good record against Vancouver at home, and it's very rare that the Whitecaps come into Avaya and able to at least get a point or even 3 points like they did last season. However, the Quakes are definitely not in a very good run coming into this game, and that we shall also see whether or not if Mateus Almeida would even coach in this game, because as I'm going to be talking about in the review later tonight, he got ejected in that game against LAFC, and that Disco might be handing Mateus Almeida not only a hefty fine, but maybe suspend him at least a game because of the fact that he failed to lead the pitch in a timely manner. But despite all that, I think for the Quakes, this is an absolute must-win, and that if they do not win this game against Vancouver, and even if they drew this game, I really have serious doubt in terms of their chances of making the playoffs. Like, I just hope that what we saw, I know it was bad against LAFC where we lost 4-0, but like I said before, I think that in some way, it's kind of good, the fact that we lost big against LAFC, because now I think this would really wakes up the team and really this team will have their kick in their butt and saying that, wow, things are definitely started to go downhill, and that we really need to wake up, and that we really need to have that kind of mentality like what we had earlier in the season when we got blown out to LAFC, and then start a good run like what we did earlier this season. So hopefully that will be once again the cases, and the Quakes really need that to happen, because these next 2 games that the Quakes are playing it has to be a 6-pointer for these next 2 games. If the Quakes do not get 6 points in these next 2 matches, I really fear that they could potentially miss the playoffs this season, and that of all season I said that this team might not make the playoffs. Yeah, this is probably one of the biggest reason why they can't make the playoffs. Now, moving on into the next match is Hell is Real. So this is the second meeting between FC Cincinnati versus Columbus, and the first meeting that is going to be taking place in Cincinnati. And in many ways, this seems like MLS Cup for both of these teams, because I think if either of these teams is able to get a win in this game, they are definitely going to have a lot of bragging rights, not only for this game, but throughout this offseason, and saying that, hey, even though we didn't make the playoffs, at least we beat our hated rival in this game. Now, FC Cincinnati is coming off with a 4-1 loss against NYCFC at home, and their record is currently the worst in the league at 5-3-18. While Columbus, they also lost to NYCFC away, and their record now dropped to 7-6-15. And the only matchup between both of these teams was a couple of weeks ago, when the game between Columbus and FC Cincinnati ends up in a thrilling 2-2 draw. And yeah, I mean, like I said, this is MLS Cup for both of these teams. That both of these teams want to win this game so that they can, of course, have that bragging right and say that at least they are not. At least, even if we're not going to make the playoffs, at least we were able to beat our hated rival. And that, I know Columbus is definitely going to be favorites coming into this match, because FC Cincinnati has been pretty dreadful in this game. But, it's a derby. I mean, forms and previous history definitely gets thrown out. And there's both of these teams is definitely going to play at 150%, and I won't be surprised if we're going to see another thrilling game like what we saw earlier this season in this Hell is Real derby. And that this is really one of the few derbies where you have two bad teams facing off each other. And that a lot of people, when they see like a derby where two bad teams face off each other, it's a very irrelevant derby. No. This is definitely going to be an exciting derby, and I really encourage people to actually watch this game, because despite the fact that both team is pretty bad this season, and I know the quality is not going to be like what we're going to see in some of the derby that involving better teams, this could definitely be a very heated kind of game, and that both of these teams really want to get a win so that they can, of course, earn that bragging rights by the end of this game. But moving on into the last two games of this weekend is the Texas Derby. So El Capitan between FC Dallas and Houston will be happening after Hell is Real Derby. And now coming into this game, Dallas currently have a 10-7-10 record, and that they're just outside of the playoff position. In fact, if I check the standings right now, they are currently 1 point, or actually no, they're not 1 point. They're actually tied with Portland in terms of that final spot in the Western Conference playoff, but Portland does have 2 games in hand over FC Dallas. Well, Houston, of course, their record is 9-4-13, and their chances of making the playoffs is definitely slipping away after, of course, they drew 2-2 against Colorado, and FC Dallas with that heroic free draw against Montreal and able to do one of the most unlikeliest comeback, going down 3-0 with half hours to go to somehow salvage a point in Montreal. Now, in the last 5 head-to-head matches in El Capitan, in the last 2 matches, you know, we actually did have a winner in this game. I mean, for a long time now, there was a stretch where every single game in the Texas Derby ends in a draw. But in the last 2 matches, it was Houston earlier this season winning 2-1 against FC Dallas. But then last year, in the last meeting of El Capitan, it was Dallas with a 4-2 win against Houston. Then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, another 1-1 draw between both of these teams, and a free draw against FC Dallas. And that was right near the tail end where pretty much every single game in the Texas Derby ends in a draw. And I think when you look at this game, I would say Dallas really need this game more than Houston, mainly because I think even if Houston get a point out of this game, or even get all 3 points in this game, I just don't know if if they still have a legitimately shot in terms of making the playoffs. I mean, they're just 6 games behind Portland right now, and that I know for a fact that they still have a lot of road games that they have to deal with, and that they just haven't really played very well this season. And, you know, Dallas is a team that, you know, they of course, it looked like in that Montreal game that this was a start of an epic collapse that Dallas always have in the second half of the season, where they started to really kind of fall apart and eventually find themselves either below the red line or tumbling down the Western Conference table. And, you know, hopefully they, of course, can win this game so that they can keep pace with Portland in terms of the standing. And heck, if they, of course, hope that Portland lose to Seattle in that match, then they, of course, will find themselves above the red line again. And maybe even if they hope that the Quakes, of course, lose to Vancouver, they can find themselves above the red line again. But, you know, Dallas, knowing the fact that they, of course, have played some of the most games out of the Western Conference, this is a game that I really felt like they need to win against Houston, and that they also need to take advantage of the fact that the Dynamo, like I said, they haven't been very good so far this season, and especially in the last couple of months, and the fact that they're not very good on the road. But with that being said, now moving on into the last game of this week, and to save the best for last and pretty much the dessert of Heineken Rivalry Week is El Trafico. And this game between LAFC versus the Galaxy have been talked a lot throughout these last couple of days, and that, you know, the big question in this game is just, can LAFC finally get over the hump and finally able to beat the Galaxy in El Trafico? If there's one thing that LAFC has missing this season in terms of being probably the best team ever in MLS history, is both MLS Cup and also beating the Galaxy. And LAFC, they're coming into this game with a record of 19-4-3, and by far the best team in the league right now. Well, the Galaxy is coming into this game with a 13-2-11 record. And remember how I said that game against the Quakes could potentially be a trap game for them? Yeah, they didn't really fall into the trap whatsoever, and instead absolutely demolished the Quakes at home 4-0 in that game. While the Galaxy, of course, coming off with a 2-2 draw against Seattle, where they're going to be a little bit disappointed considering the fact that they should have won that game if they didn't concede that howler late in the game. Now, in the last head-to-head matches, I mean, I'm pretty sure if you're an LAFC fan, you want to cover your ears here, because I'm going to tell you that the Galaxy, of course, won the last match against LAFC 3-2. Then, of course, they drew 1-1 in the last El Trafico of 2018 before drawing 2-2 against LAFC and winning 4-3 against LAFC in probably one of the best match I have ever seen in MLS history. And that, yeah, I mean, this is really a game that I think if there is one game that LAFC really wants to win besides MLS Cup, this is going to be the game. And that, you know, they just haven't been able to find a way to beat the Galaxy so far in their history, and that it just seemed like the Galaxy has just been their biggest nemesis. And, you know, the question is, you know, with the Galaxy, will Zlatan once again show up and really just kind of crush the hopes of LAFC? Because it seemed like every time in El Trafico, he always tends to show up and crush LAFC dreams, and it happened again last time when he, of course, scored a hat-trick in that game against LAFC. And LAFC also have to know that, well, yes, they, of course, won 4-0 against the Quakes, and they basically just sent a message that, yeah, they are definitely the best team in the league by a country mile, or even in the history of MLS. And really, in that game, they kind of play a very Pep Guardiola, Man City level kind of game against the Quakes. It's easy for them to just kind of level off and think that, yeah, we are going to do, you know, we can just easily do the same thing to the Galaxy, and that everything is going to work out well. That, of course, is not gonna how it works, and that I really think that this could be a very, very intense kind of match, and that, you know, the only thing I will say that LAFC might have an advantage in this game, besides the fact that they have a better record than the Galaxy, is that at least they're playing at home in this game. And in the last game, they were so close to finally winning their first ever El Trafico, only to blow it late in the game and drew 2-2 against the Galaxy. So, yeah, this is definitely a must-watch game, and that this is definitely a great game to end the weekend in terms of all these Heineken Rivalry Week games that's going to be happening. And unfortunately, since this game ends so late in the week, I'm probably going to have to decide where I'm going to maybe have to split the review into two parts again, where part 1 will feature the first 5 games and part 2 will feature the last 6 games, because, you know, Monday morning I have to wake up at 6:30 in the morning to, of course, go to school, and you know that I don't really have time to actually look at 11 games, and that I'm going to have to spend about 3 hours after this game is over to do the review. So, yeah, I might even maybe delay the review until Monday, when I, of course, talk about both of not only in this game, but also the last 5 games that is in MLS Heineken Rivalry Week. But that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. As always, let me know in the comments below, what do you think is going to be the result of all these kind of rivalry game. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.